The cruelest words I ever heard came from my own son, and they were spoken on my wedding day. I was standing beneath a canopy of white roses, my hands trembling inside lace gloves, when Caleb, my only child, rose from his chair and laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not a surprised laugh, a mocking one. "Mom," he said loudly, turning to the 300 guests seated in that grand Charleston ballroom, "you actually married him." The room shifted. You can feel when a room shifts. It's like the air thins out all at once. I was 62 years old that afternoon, a widow for nearly 17 years. I had buried my first husband after a long illness and buried pieces of myself along with him. For a long time, I believed romance was something meant for younger women with smooth hands and hopeful hearts. And then I met Walter. Walter Hale walked into my life quietly like the tide rolling in at dawn. He wasn't flashy. He wore pressed but simple suits, drove an old navy blue sedan, lived in a modest townhouse on the edge of town. He spoke gently, listened carefully, and when he looked at me, I felt seen, not as someone's mother, not as someone's widow, but as a woman. That was enough for me. Apparently, it wasn't enough for my son. Caleb adjusted the cuffs of his expensive tailored jacket, one I suspect cost more than my entire wedding dress, and looked Walter up and down, as if examining a yard sale item. "That's your upgrade, Mom," he said. "From Dad to this." A few uncomfortable chuckles slipped from my daughter-in-law's side of the family. Her name is Brittany. She comes from what they call old Charleston money, though if you ask around, most of it is newly borrowed. Still, they carry themselves like royalty at a Renaissance fair. Brittany leaned toward her mother and stage whispered, "He looks like he sells used appliances." They laughed, laughed. My fingers tightened around my bouquet. Walter didn't flinch. That's something I'll never forget. He simply stood there, tall and calm, his silver hair catching the light from the chandeliers. He squeezed my hand once, steady, grounding. The officiant hesitated, unsure whether to continue. "Caleb," I managed, my voice softer than I wanted it to be, "please sit down." But he stepped into the aisle instead. "Mom, this is embarrassing," he said. "You've got a paid-off house, Dad's retirement account, and you're handing it over to some old drifter who shops at discount racks." There it was. Not concern, not protection. Money. It always circled back to money with Caleb. Behind him, Brittany's father folded his arms, watching with interest, as if this were better than cable television. A few guests lifted their phones. I saw it happen. They wanted to capture the spectacle. My wedding had turned into a performance, and I stood at the center of it, heart pounding, cheeks burning, the lace of my dress suddenly feeling too tight around my ribs. But what Caleb didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Walter had been silent for a reason. And outside that ballroom, something had just arrived. I didn't understand it yet, not until the doors opened. When those ballroom doors opened, the laughter stopped. Not slowly, not politely. It stopped the way a storm goes silent before lightning strikes. 3 men in dark suits stepped inside first, calm, composed, not aggressive, but unmistakably purposeful. They weren't hotel staff. They weren't guests. And they certainly weren't lost. Every head in the room turned. Caleb lowered his champagne glass mid-sip. Brittany's smile faltered. I felt Walter's hand gently shift at my waist, not tightening, not restraining, just steady. One of the men approached us quietly and leaned toward Walter. He spoke in a low voice, respectful, professional. "Sir, everything is in place, sir." That word hung in the air longer than it should have. Caleb scoffed. "What is this? You hired backup." A few uneasy murmurs rippled through the guests. Walter turned slightly toward the man and nodded. "Thank you, Thomas. Give us a moment." The man inclined his head and stepped back. I looked up at my husband, my new husband, and for the first time that day, I saw something different in his eyes. Not anger, not humiliation, authority. "Walter," I whispered. He gave me the smallest, warmest smile. "Grace, my love, I didn't want it to happen this way." The room was frozen. Even the waitstaff stood still, trays balanced in midair. Caleb crossed his arms. "What are you playing at?" Walter turned to face the guests fully now. His posture changed, not dramatically, just enough that you could feel it. Like a man stepping into a coat that fits perfectly. "My apologies," he said, voice calm but resonant. "I hadn't intended to introduce this part of my life today, but it seems clarity is necessary." Clarity. Brittany's mother whispered something sharp under her breath. I caught the word ridiculous. Walter reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a slim leather card holder. He handed a business card to Caleb. Caleb glanced at it casually at first. Then he looked again. His face drained of color so quickly I thought he might faint. "What is it?" Brittany hissed, trying to peek. He didn't answer. Instead, he looked up at Walter, as if seeing him for the first time. You're that Hale?" Walter gave a slight nod. A quiet stir spread through the room. Hale Global Holdings. I didn't know the name yet, but judging by the way several guests gasped softly, others did. Walter spoke evenly. "I founded the company 32 years ago. Real estate, infrastructure, private equity. We employ just under 12,000 people across 4 states." I felt my knees weaken. 12,000? Caleb let out a strained laugh. No, that's not possible. You live in a townhouse." "Yes," Walter replied gently. "I do. You drive a 15-year-old car." "Yes." "Why?" Walter's eyes flickered toward me, softened. "Because I was not searching for someone impressed by what I own." Silence. Heavy, thick, almost sacred. Brittany's father stepped forward now, suddenly eager. "Mr. Hale, if we had known." Walter raised a hand, polite but firm. That's precisely the point. I stood there, breath shallow, heart racing, not because of the money, but because the man I loved had lived beside me for 2 years without once mentioning any of this. 2 years of farmers' markets, evening walks, quiet dinners, laughter. He had known who I was, but I hadn't known who he was. Caleb's expression shifted from contempt to calculation, and that frightened me more than anything he'd said earlier, because I could see it happening. The pivot, the sudden adjustment, the realization that he had insulted the wrong man. But Walter wasn't finished speaking, and what he said next would change my relationship with my son forever. The moment I saw that look in Caleb's eyes, the shift from ridicule to recognition, I felt something inside me settle. Not break, settle. Like dust finally falling after a long storm. Caleb straightened his jacket, smoothed his hair back, and forced a laugh that didn't quite land. "Well," he said, glancing around at the guests, "this is quite the surprise." Surprise. That's what he called it. Not apology, not remorse, just surprise. Brittany stepped closer to him, her earlier smirk replaced with sudden attentiveness. "Mr. Hale," she said sweetly, as if tasting the name for the first time, "we didn't realize you were in real estate." Walter didn't respond immediately. He simply looked at them both, not with anger, not with pride, just with quiet understanding. The kind of look you give children who have just revealed something about themselves without meaning to. "I prefer to keep my personal life simple," he said. "It tends to reveal who values what." That sentence drifted across the ballroom like incense. I watched as Brittany's father cleared his throat and stepped forward with a hand extended. "Walter, may I call you Walter? It seems we got off on the wrong foot. Misunderstandings happen in families. Families." I almost laughed. Walter did not take his hand. "Sir," he said gently, "nothing that was said here was a misunderstanding." The room tightened again. Caleb shifted his weight. "Look, Mom, if I came off harsh, it's just because I was worried. You've worked your whole life. I didn't want someone taking advantage of you." There it was, the rewrite, the softening. I turned slowly toward him. "Taking advantage of me," I repeated quietly. "Yes," he said quickly, seizing the narrative. "I mean, you didn't know who he was. We didn't know. You could have been making a mistake." I studied my son's face, the same face I once kissed goodnight. The same boy who used to run into my arms after school with scraped knees and wild stories. But the man standing before me wasn't worried about my heart. He was worried about my accounts. "Caleb," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "if Walter had been exactly who you thought he was 10 minutes ago, would you still be concerned for me?" He hesitated. That hesitation was louder than any insult he'd thrown earlier. "Well, I just know," I said softly. "You wouldn't." Silence again. Walter placed his hand gently over mine, but he didn't speak. He was letting me have this moment. And I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. This wasn't about Walter's wealth. It was about my dignity. For years, Caleb had treated me like a backup plan, a quiet resource, a woman whose sacrifices were assumed and whose needs were negotiable. I thought of the birthdays he forgot, the holidays spent alone, the loan he once made me sign paperwork for paperwork with interest. And now here he was, adjusting his tone based on a balance sheet. Brittany attempted one more smile. Grace, we were just joking earlier. You know how weddings are everyone's emotional. I looked at her. No, I said calmly. Mocking someone's worth isn't emotion. It's character. A few guests shifted in their seats. Some lowered their phones. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Caleb's voice grew sharper. So what, Mom? You're just going to cut us off because we didn't recognize a billionaire in disguise. Disguise. Walter finally spoke again. I was never in disguise, he said evenly. I was exactly who I presented myself to be. And he was right. Kind. Present. Consistent. The wealth changed nothing about the man I married, but it had changed everything about my son. I felt something heavy rise in my chest, not anger, not even sorrow. Clarity. And clarity can be more painful than betrayal. Caleb, I said quietly, this isn't about money anymore. He opened his mouth to argue, but before he could, one of the suited men near the door stepped forward again, this time holding a tablet. And what he whispered to Walter made my heart skip. I didn't know what frightened me more, the coldness in Caleb's eyes or the calm in Walter's. The man in the dark suit leaned in and spoke quietly, but in the silence of that ballroom, I caught enough. Sir, the media has been alerted. They're outside. Media. My stomach dropped. Walter exhaled slowly, as though this was an inconvenience, not a crisis. Already? Yes, sir. Someone tipped them. Every head in the room swiveled instinctively toward Caleb. His jaw tightened. I didn't call anyone, he snapped defensively. Why would I? Walter studied him for a long moment, not accusing, not emotional, just assessing. It doesn't matter, Walter said finally. We'll handle it. Handle it. That word again, steady, controlled. I felt suddenly small in my own wedding dress, like a girl who had wandered into a world too large to understand. Cameras, reporters, helicopters. This wasn't the quiet life Walter and I had shared. Walter, I whispered, what's happening? He turned fully toward me, and in that instant, the ballroom disappeared. It was just him and me again, like at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings. Grace, he said softly, I've avoided publicity for years, but my name carries weight in certain circles. When someone in this room searched it, notifications were triggered. My eyes widened. Notifications. Yes, my security team monitors unusual spikes. When my profile is accessed multiple times in a short window, especially locally, they check in. Local. Sudden. Today. The pieces came together. Someone had looked him up the moment Caleb saw that business card. And now, The press was outside my wedding. Brittany's father straightened immediately, smoothing his tie. Well, this is wonderful publicity, isn't it? A wedding story second chances at love, very inspiring. Walter's expression cooled by a single degree. This is not a publicity event, he said quietly. Caleb ran a hand through his hair. Okay, fine. So reporters are outside. Big deal. Let's spin this. Mom, you love a good story. Widow finds billionaire. It's romantic. I felt something sharp twist inside me. Spin this. As if my life were a marketing campaign. As if I were a headline, I said softly. Caleb hesitated. I didn't mean it like that. But he had. Walter turned toward the guests now. Ladies and gentlemen, he said evenly, I apologize for the disruption. Those who wish to leave may do so discreetly through the side exit. My team will ensure privacy. A few guests immediately began gathering their belongings. Others stayed, drawn by curiosity. Caleb stepped closer to me, lowering his voice. Mom, this is huge. Do you understand what this means? Connections, investments. My firm could. I held up a hand. Stop, he blinked. For 5 minutes, I continued, my voice trembling but firm. You believed I had married a man with nothing. You humiliated him. You humiliated me. And now, because you discovered he has everything, you're negotiating. It's not like that. It is exactly like that. Brittany's hand slid into Caleb's arm, whispering urgently in his ear. I caught fragments. Opportunity, we need this. Don't mess it up. Walter watched it all unfold. Then he did something I didn't expect. He stepped forward, not toward Caleb, toward the microphone still standing near the altar. He lifted it calmly. I think, he said, his voice carrying through the entire room, it's time we clarify something important. The guests froze. Caleb stiffened. And I suddenly realized this wasn't about revealing wealth. It was about revealing truth. And whatever Walter was about to say would draw a line no one could uncross. When Walter lifted that microphone, my heart began to pound so loudly I thought the entire ballroom could hear it. He didn't look angry. He didn't look triumphant. He looked resolved. I need everyone to understand something, he began, his voice steady but warm. Grace did not marry a wealthy man today. A confused murmur rippled through the guests. Caleb frowned. What? Walter continued. She married the same man who walked her home from the library in the rain 2 winters ago. The same man who helped her repaint her kitchen cabinets. The same man who sat beside her in urgent care when she sprained her wrist gardening. He turned slightly toward me, and my throat tightened. I never introduced myself to Grace as a billionaire. I introduced myself as Walter, a widower, a man who loves fresh bread, early mornings, and honest conversation. The room softened. Some of the tension eased. But he went on, and now his eyes shifted toward my son. What happened here today was not about surprise. It was about values. Caleb shifted uncomfortably. When I was believed to be ordinary, Walter said, I was mocked. When I was revealed to be wealthy, I became valuable. The sentence landed like a stone in water. Silence expanded outward. Walter lowered the microphone slightly, but didn't step back. I have spent the last decade living simply on purpose, not because I lack means, but because I wanted to know if I ever found love again, it would be for who I am, not what I own. He looked at me again, and my eyes filled. Grace never once asked about my assets, never once questioned my lifestyle. She cared whether I had eaten, whether I was sleeping well, whether my knee was hurting after long walks. A few soft chuckles moved through the crowd at that. She saw a man, not a portfolio. My breath caught in my chest. But today, he said gently, we witnessed something revealing. And not just about me. Caleb's jaw tightened. Are you trying to embarrass me publicly? Walter shook his head. No, you've done that yourself. The words weren't cruel. They were factual. And somehow that made them heavier. Brittany stepped forward, voice sharp. This is ridiculous. We said a few jokes. Everyone jokes at weddings. Walter turned to her calmly. You called me trash, she faltered, and you laughed when your husband questioned his mother's judgment in front of hundreds of guests. No one spoke, because there was nothing to argue with. Caleb's tone changed now, less defiant, more urgent. Okay, fine. We crossed a line. I admit that, but we didn't know. Walter tilted his head slightly. Exactly. Caleb blinked. You didn't know, Walter repeated. And because you didn't know, you assumed I was unworthy. The air felt thick again. You see, Walter continued, money doesn't change character. It reveals it. And I felt that sentence travel straight into my bones. Caleb's face flushed. Mom, he said, turning toward me now, tell him this isn't necessary. We can talk privately. Privately. Now that the truth was inconvenient, I took a slow breath. For years, I had swallowed discomfort to keep peace. I had softened my words to avoid conflict. I had made excuses for behavior that hurt me. But something had shifted inside me when those doors opened earlier. I stepped toward the microphone beside Walter. Caleb, I said quietly, this is necessary. His expression crumpled, not entirely, with remorse, with fear, because for the first time in his life, I wasn't backing down, and I hadn't even begun to say what I needed to say. My hands were trembling when I reached for the microphone, but my voice wasn't. Isn't that strange? Sometimes your body shakes, but your soul stands still. Caleb, I said, looking at my son, not the boy I raised, but the man he had become. For years, I thought if I just loved you harder, you would grow softer. The room was silent enough to hear fabric shift. You've always chased status, I continued. Better schools, better clothes, better neighborhoods. I told myself it was ambition. I told myself you were building a strong life. Caleb swallowed, but didn't interrupt. But somewhere along the way, I said gently, you started measuring people by what they could give you. His eyes flickered. And I let it happen. That startled him. Mom, this isn't your fault. No, I said softly. It isn't, but I ignored signs because I didn't want to see them. I thought of the loan he made me sign papers for 3 years ago when I needed help fixing the roof. The interest he charged, the way he framed it as teaching responsibility. I excused the distance. I excused the forgotten holidays. I excused the way Brittany speaks to me when she thinks I won't respond. Brittany's lips parted slightly in protest, but no sound came out. But today, I said, my voice steady as the tide, you stood up at my wedding and called the man I love a nobody. I let that sit. You didn't question his kindness. You didn't question his heart. You questioned his net worth. Caleb's face reddened. I was worried about you. No, I said calmly. You were worried about inheritance. A sharp inhale moved through the guests. Caleb stiffened. That's not fair, isn't it? I asked softly. If Walter had truly been the modest retiree you believed he was, would you be standing here right now asking to talk privately? He didn't answer, because we both knew the truth. For a long moment, I just looked at him, really looked. I saw exhaustion behind his eyes, pressure, pride, fear of falling behind, the desperate need to appear successful in rooms that never felt secure. But I also saw entitlement, and that's harder to love. I am not your investment portfolio, I said quietly. I am your mother. His jaw trembled. You humiliated me today because you thought I had made a downgrade. Tears finally gathered in his eyes. I didn't mean to hurt you, but you did. The words came out softer than I expected. And the worst part, I continued, feeling the ache in my chest. You didn't even see it happening. Walter's hand found mine again, not guiding, not rescuing, just present. I will not apologize for marrying a good man, I said, and I will not allow my happiness to be negotiated based on wealth. Caleb looked down at the floor. For the first time all day, he looked small. I don't need you to admire my husband, I said gently, but you will respect him. Silence. And if you cannot do that, I added, my voice barely above a whisper, but stronger than ever, then you will not stand beside me. That landed, not as punishment, as boundary. Caleb's breathing grew heavier. Are you cutting me off? He asked. Oh, how that question pierced me, because even now he thought in financial terms. I closed my eyes for just a second. When I opened them again, I realized something painful and freeing all at once. This wasn't about cutting him off. It was about stepping back. And what I said next would decide whether my son would remain in my life or simply remain my past. I have learned something in my 62 years. Boundaries feel cruel to the people who benefited from your silence. Caleb, I said quietly, lowering the microphone now, because this wasn't for the crowd anymore. This was for us. I am not cutting you off. Relief flickered across his face. But I am stepping back. That relief vanished. You don't get to insult the man I love and then reposition yourself when you find out he's powerful, I continued. That isn't concern, that's convenience. Brittany tugged at his sleeve, whispering urgently, but he brushed her off this time. His eyes stayed on me. You've spent your whole life trying to climb, I said gently, but somewhere along the way, you forgot to look down and see who was holding the ladder. His throat moved as he swallowed. I carried you when your father passed, I went on. I worked double shifts. I missed dinners. I skipped vacations. I told myself it was worth it because one day you would grow into a man who understood sacrifice. My voice softened. Today, I realized you understand profit, not sacrifice. The room felt smaller now, more intimate, less spectacle, more reckoning. I cannot fix that for you, I said, and Walter cannot fix that for you either. Caleb glanced toward Walter, almost defensively. I wasn't asking him to fix anything. Walter raised an eyebrow slightly, but remained silent. You already were, I replied, the moment your tone changed. A long pause. Then Caleb did something I didn't expect. He looked ashamed, not embarrassed, ashamed. His shoulders dropped slightly. The performance slipped. I've been under pressure, he said quietly. You don't understand how hard it is out there, keeping up, maintaining reputation, investors, clients. Everything is image. I studied him. I do understand pressure, I said softly. I just never made it someone else's burden. That landed differently. There was no accusation in it, just truth. Caleb ran a hand over his face. I didn't want you to get hurt. By what? I asked. By loving someone who doesn't own a private jet. He didn't respond. Walter finally stepped forward then, not to dominate the space, but to steady it. Caleb, he said evenly, I have no interest in replacing you. I'm not here to compete. I married your mother because I love her, not because I needed anything. Caleb looked at him, and for the first time, there wasn't hostility in his gaze. There was confusion. Then why hide it? He asked quietly. Why live small if you're not? Walter's answer came without hesitation. Because living small protects what is real. That sentence seemed to echo through something inside my son. You've built your identity on scale, Walter continued. Scale of income, scale of lifestyle, scale of perception. But the only scale that matters in the end is character. The ballroom felt like a chapel. No music, no movement, just words. Caleb exhaled slowly. I messed up, he said. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't polished. It was simple. And that's how real apologies begin. But something inside me knew this wasn't finished, because regret in a moment is easy. Change over time is hard. And what I didn't know yet was that life was about to test Caleb far more brutally than this wedding ever could. If that wedding had been the end of it, perhaps our story would have closed neatly with an apology, a toast, and soft music fading into forgiveness. But life doesn't tie bows that quickly. 3 months after the wedding, Caleb's world began to crack. I didn't hear it from him first. I heard it from silence. He stopped calling, not out of pride this time, but absence. The kind of absence that feels heavy. Then one evening, as Walter and I were finishing supper, my phone rang. It was Caleb, not confident, not polished, just tired. "Mom," he said, and his voice sounded smaller than I had heard it in years. "Are you busy?" I stepped out onto the porch so Walter wouldn't overhear. The autumn air was cool, leaves skimming across the yard like restless thoughts. "What's wrong?" I asked gently. A long pause. "My firm is under investigation." The words dropped between us like a stone. Improper reporting, inflated projections, a senior partner shifting blame downward, investors panicking, news outlets circling, and suddenly the reputation he had built so carefully, the image he had polished, was slipping through his fingers. "I didn't do anything illegal," he rushed to explain. "But I signed things I should have questioned. I trusted people because I needed the promotion. Needed. There it was again. What does that mean?" I asked quietly. "It means I might lose everything." His voice cracked on that last word. Everything. Status, salary, the house in the gated neighborhood, the dinners with people who shook hands firmly but never looked each other in the eye. I closed my eyes for a moment. This wasn't the humiliation of a wedding. This was consequence. "Are you calling me for advice?" I asked gently. "No," he said, and his honesty startled me. "I'm calling because I don't know who else to call." The porch light flickered softly above me. "Brittany?" I asked. "She's angry," he admitted. "She's worried about appearances, about what her parents will think." Of course she was. "And what are you worried about?" I asked. There was a long silence on the line. "I don't know who I am without it," he said finally. That answer broke my heart more than any insult he'd ever thrown. Because beneath the arrogance, there had always been fear. Walter quietly opened the screen door and stepped onto the porch behind me. He didn't ask questions. He just stood close enough that I could feel his steady presence. "Caleb," I said softly, "losing something that was built on image is not the same as losing yourself." He sniffed, trying to regain composure. "I don't know how to fix this." "You don't fix it with power," I replied. "You fix it with honesty." There was a pause. Would he talk to me?" he asked quietly. "Not about money, not about connections, just talk." I turned slightly toward my husband. He didn't need to hear the words to understand the question. He simply nodded once. "Yes," I said into the phone. He would. And in that moment, I realized something beautiful and painful at the same time. The wedding had revealed my son's character, but this storm would rebuild it. The first time Caleb came to our house after everything unraveled, he didn't arrive in his polished sedan. He came in a rental. That detail shouldn't matter, but it did. There was no sharp suit, no designer watch catching the sun, just a wrinkled button-down shirt and a face that looked 10 years older than it had at my wedding. I opened the door before he could knock twice. For a second, we just stood there. He looked past me into the house, the modest living room, the soft yellow lamps, Walter's reading glasses resting on the side table. It wasn't impressive. It wasn't grand. It was peaceful. "Hi, Mom," he said. Not mother, not brisk, not distracted. Just Mom. "Come in," I replied. Walter stood up from his armchair when Caleb entered. There was no tension in him, no performance. He extended his hand simply. Caleb looked at it for a moment, then shook it. Firmly. "Thank you for seeing me," Caleb said. Walter nodded once. "Sit down." We gathered at the kitchen table, the same one where Walter and I drink coffee every morning. No security team, no cameras, no guests, just 3 people and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Caleb spoke first. "I messed up," he said. "Not rushed this time, not defensive, not just at the wedding, at work, in the way I've handled everything." Walter didn't rescue him from the discomfort. "How?" he asked calmly. Caleb rubbed his hands together. "I stopped asking whether something was right. I only asked whether it would move me forward. There it was. Forward, always forward. And now?" Walter asked. "And now I'm suspended. There's an internal review. If it goes badly, I'll lose my license. Maybe worse." His voice shook slightly. I watched him carefully. This wasn't the same tone he used when negotiating contracts. This wasn't calculated vulnerability. This was real. Walter leaned back in his chair. "You know," he said quietly, "when I was 38, I nearly lost everything." Caleb looked up, surprised. "I built aggressively," Walter continued. "Expanded too quickly. Trusted people without examining their character because I was chasing growth. The market corrected. So did life." Caleb listened intently. "I had to sell properties I loved," Walter went on. "Had to face investors and admit I was wrong. It was humiliating." "What did you do?" Caleb asked. "I stopped building for applause," Walter replied, "and started building for stability." Silence settled between them. "You cannot control whether this investigation ends well," Walter said calmly, "but you can control how you respond to it." Caleb nodded slowly. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I know," Walter said. "No lecture, no grand advice, just acknowledgement." Caleb glanced at me then. "Mom, I'm sorry. This time, it wasn't about inheritance. It wasn't about wealth." "I know," I said softly, and I did. He looked around the kitchen again, at the chipped ceramic bowl on the counter, at the bread Walter had baked that morning. "It's quiet here," he said. "Yes," I replied. "It feels steady." Walter smiled faintly. "That's because nothing in this house is built on performance." Caleb let that sink in. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then my son did something I never expected. He asked, quietly, "Can I come back next week?" The day Caleb got his final decision, The sky was clear in a way that almost felt unfair. Life has a strange way of delivering hard news on beautiful mornings. He called just after 9. "They're revoking my position," he said calmly. Too calmly. "I won't be charged with anything criminal, but I'm done there." I closed my eyes and let out the breath I'd been holding for weeks. Done. For years, that firm had been his identity, his armor, his proof, and now it was gone. "Are you okay?" I asked gently. There was a pause. "I don't know yet," he admitted. That was the first honest answer he'd given in years. He came over that evening, not to strategize, not to network, but to sit. Walter had made stew, the kind that simmers slowly and fills a house with patience. We didn't rush to advice. We ate. After dinner, Caleb stayed at the table while Walter washed the dishes. He watched him quietly for a moment. "I used to think men like you were lucky," Caleb said. "Wealthy, respected, secure." Walter dried his hands and turned around. "Luck had nothing to do with it," he said calmly. "And security isn't in money. It's in knowing who you are when money disappears." Caleb looked down at his hands. "I don't think I ever learned that." Walter pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "Then this is your chance. Simple, not dramatic, just true." Later, when Walter stepped outside to check the garden, Caleb and I were alone in the kitchen. "Mom," he said quietly, "I thought if I built enough, earned enough, impressed enough, I wouldn't feel small anymore." My heart ached at that word. "Small? You were never small," I said softly. "You were afraid." He nodded. "And when I saw you marry someone I believed had less than us, it scared me. I thought you were stepping backward." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "Happiness is not backward," I said gently. "It's just not loud." Tears filled his eyes, not dramatic, not desperate, just honest. "I'm going to have to start over," he said. "Yes," I replied, "but this time, build something you can stand on without pretending." A few months later, Caleb took a position at a smaller firm. Less pay, less prestige, more transparency. He called more often, came for dinner without checking his phone every 3 minutes. Brittany struggled with the change at first. Status had been her language, but even she began to soften when there was nothing left to perform. And Walter, he never once used his wealth to rescue Caleb. Not with money, only with presence. Because some lessons must be lived, not financed. Sometimes, when I sit on the porch in the evenings, I think back to my wedding day. The laughter, the humiliation, the black subs, the reveal. At the time, I thought the surprise was discovering my husband was wealthy. But that wasn't the real revelation. The real revelation was this: money doesn't expose who others are. It exposes who you are when you think someone has none. And if there is one thing I have learned in this long, winding life, it is this: choose the person who would sit beside you in a quiet kitchen, even if the world never applauds it. Because applause fades, but character stays. Thank you for being here and listening. If this story touched you, please tap the like button. It helps more than you know. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from or sharing a small part of your own story.